All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Would ask that we please read the opening statement.
Let the minutes reflect that adequate notice of the holding of this regular meeting of the Howell Township Council was provided for in the following manner. By the posting of a copy of said notice upon the bulletin board in the Township Municipal Building on January 1, 2007. By the faxing of a copy of said notice to the Asbury Park Press, Tri-Town News, and Star Ledger for publication on January 1, 2007. By the filing of a copy of said form of notice in the Township Clerk's office on January 1, 2007. The public will be allowed to attend and will be allowed to participate pursuant to the Open Public Meetings Law. The public is reminded that civility and decorum will be maintained during the meeting. Any contracts awarded at this meeting or between now and the next meeting will be required to comply with the requirements of Public Law 1975, Chapter 127. In accordance with the Fire Prevention Code, be advised that this facility is designed with 3 emergency exits for your safety. The locations are as follows. Upon exiting the meeting room, to the rear there to your immediate left and immediate right, and at the front of the meeting room to the left of the dais. Furthermore, smoking is not permitted in the municipal building. Please take note that this meeting is being videotaped for possible future broadcast on Howell Township TV 77. Roll call. Mrs. Dalton? Here. Mr. Howell?
Here.
Mrs. Showmaker?
Mrs. Showmaker will be here momentarily.
Mr. Walsh?
Here.
Mayor DeBella?
Here. Mr. Chernetsky, we have reason to go into executive session, is that right?
Yes, sir. Litigation, contracts, and personnel.
All right. Would you please read the statement, Ms. Woolman, for executive session?
Yes. Whereas Title 10, Chapter 4, Section 13 of the New Jersey Revised Statutes require that the public shall not be excluded from any meeting of a public body unless a resolution authorizing such exclusion is adopted at a public meeting. Whereas the Township Council of the Township of Howell has determined that such a closed meeting is required to discuss certain matters which are exempted from consideration with the public in attendance under New Jersey Revised Statutes 10:4-12, namely litigation, contracts, personnel. Now therefore be it resolved by the Township Council of the Township of Howell that the public shall be excluded from the next portion of this meeting, and that the Township Council will reconvene in public session thereafter. Be it further resolved that minutes will be kept of the meeting in closed session, and the time and the circumstances under which the discussion conducted in closed session can be disclosed to the public cannot be determined at this time.
Okay, we need a motion, please.
Motion to go into executive, Mayor?
We have a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mr. Howell?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mayor DeBella?
Yes. Okay, for the benefit of the public, we expect to convene in regular session in approximately 1 hour. I'm going to reconvene the meeting to order. I'd like to welcome members of the public to the Howell Township's our regular session meeting. The time is approximately 8 p.m. Our apologies for the delay coming out of closed session. We've already read the appropriate opening statements and called the roll. I would please ask that we all stand for a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would also ask that we please just remain standing for a moment in silent observation of the troops that continue to defend this great country all over the world. Thank you. Okay, we go back to our agenda. We have up for consideration the acceptance of minutes from a variety of meetings, including the January 1 reorganization, January 2 special meeting, January 9 special meeting, and January 16th regular and executive session meeting. I'd ask the member of the council to move these in tandem.
So moved, Mayor.
We have a motion. We need a second.
Second.
Are there any remarks or comments? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mr. Howell?
Yes.
Mrs. Showmaker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mayor DeBella?
Yes. Reports of officials. Mr. Chernetsky, what do you have for us, sir?
Mayor, we have a number of items with respect to the agenda that I'd like to point out first. Ordinance 8A3, the Northwoods Place, Route 9 bus shelter. We received word that they would like to, New Jersey Transit wants to amend the plan, and so therefore we would ask council to table that ordinance.
And
Basically,
the
to
ordinance number
defeat it.
is
883.
883. Okay?
Okay. On the add-on agenda notes that were passed on, with respect to all the zoning ordinances we're dealing with, a new ordinance was added, and I'll explain what that is. Basically, all the ordinances indicated to amend the map, the zoning map of the town. And in terms of figuring out how we were going to manage it, we thought at our staff meeting this afternoon that the best thing to do would be some of these ordinances may be supported, some of them may not be. So what we would do is once we go through the 4 or 5 ordinances that we're considering tonight, we would then ask you to introduce the zoning map ordinance based on your support or lack thereof of a particular zone change. So then we would just cross it out on that map that you have hanging up there. And then so this would be the last ordinance we introduce. The idea is we're trying to make the zone changes in bite-sized and manageable sort of ways. Continuing on with the agenda, Ordinance 9A7, which would create the HD3 zone. We would ask council to hold off on introduction of that. There are some mapping issues and other considerations that we still need to work out. And the same holds true for 9A9, the RMLD with respect to the Centrex home project.
So you would like us to table 9A7 and 9A9, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Also, Resolution 9B4 will require a public hearing. Okay, that does it for the agenda items I wanted to call your attention to. Just a few other minor things.
Before
Mayor,
you do that, I'd ask a member of the council to introduce a motion to table items on the agenda as follows: 8A3, 9A7, and 9A9.
So moved, Mayor.
We have a motion, we need a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any remarks on tabling these items for further consideration? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mr. Howell?
Yes.
Mrs. Showmaker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mayor DeBella?
Yes.
Mayor, I know when I began here about a year ago, you and the council really wanted to make great use of internet technology and laid out a plan for us to work on. And I'm pleased to announce that on Friday we launched the Q Alert system on our Howell Township website, and you have a brief few pages on that. Basically what that does is it allows residents to file their own RTCs online. Those are the resident resolution tracking forms, where you can see from the page that we've developed a whole bunch of scroll-down menus. So for example, on the third page, if you were to hit basin cleanup, that has a direct link to the individual responsible for that and their backup. So what we're asking council to do is to please make sure that we encourage all residents to log their complaints on the RTC system. If you do not happen to have access to the internet, as many don't, Allison Carini in the clerk's office is still able to take that information and put it online for you. What we'll then be able to do, Mayor, is at the end of the year, we can give you a map that breaks down, color-coded and all sorts of graphs, telling the council exactly where the complaints are coming from, what areas, and that can help guide our investment decisions and our customer service program. So it's a product that I'm very excited about. We've had Q Alert kind of fine-tune it for our needs. And lastly, I'd want to point out, I shared a memo with you that the training module Ron Snorbush developed for this was something that the company has now adopted for itself, and we will be getting free training for our staff to use Q Alert. So we're very excited about rolling this out. When MIS does their budget presentation, hopefully on the 13th, they will give you a better PowerPoint feel for all the capabilities that this program has.
terrific. I remember demoing this 2 years ago when we laid this plan together, so it's nice to see that it's finally here.
Mayor, Council, Council ought to be aware of a project that staff is undertaking with respect to the Manasquan River, and I would ask Mr. Nunziato to fill council in on some of the permitting issues that we're involved in, because they're going to require notification of a great deal many residents.
Just as a follow-up to the, some of the issues last week as far as the desnagging or the removal of the trees from the Manasquan River, we have been underway in trying to get the authorization for what's called the General Permit 26, which is the tree removal permit within the river. We're right now working on the administrative, technical parts of the application, the mapping, the photography, the access points. There are public notice requirements involved. We're going to actually apply for the whole entire length of the Manasquan from the Howell border to West Farms Road, which is about 5 lineal miles of river. Public notice requirements would probably be almost 100 people, so we're getting that list together. There will be a notification. There's also a public notice that's published in the newspaper. And of course, there's an application fee for that. That stuff we're hoping would be completed within the next week or so. And just to further that a little bit, once that application is actually made with the DEP, there's a 15-day review period by which they'll either deem you incomplete or they'll deem you complete. And at that point, if it constitutes a full review, maybe there's endangered species or some other concerns they have, they might kick you into a larger, more stricter permit. But if they don't do that within that 15-day period and take no action, your project is actually authorized, and at that point you can actually begin the removal process. So hopefully within 2 or 3 weeks we have some information from the state as to if we can pursue this on a full-time basis.
Any questions from the council for Mr. Nunziato? Okay, thank you, Mr. Nunziato.
Mayor, at this point, I'd ask the deputy manager to give an update on the North Howell Little League project as was requested at our last meeting.
Go right ahead.
Howell North Little League went in front of the planning board regarding their lighting project. They will contact the people across the street from the Little League facility to be sure that there's no issue with the lights. Then our Buildings and Grounds Department has contacted JCP&L and given them the go-ahead for the pole and the service. We anticipate their plumbing inspections to be completed this week. Their block will be delivered by Friday. They will have volunteers and a mason be doing that this week. They will be priming and painting the interior walls over the next 2 weeks, and we will be scheduling an update meeting 2 weeks from now.
Okay. Any questions for anyone on that particular topic? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Schlegel. What else, Mr. Chinaski?
Mayor, the last thing is that I'd like to point out is, as you know, Howell experienced severe power outages on Wednesday, late afternoon into the evening. By Thursday morning, 5,000 residents, up to 5,000 residents were without power. I just wanted to, all the council members called me to express some frustration with the response time on JCP&L, and I don't fault you at all with that frustration. However, I do feel it's important to point out that I think our municipal staff did a stellar job on the things they needed to do, with always opportunities for improvement. And that wraps up my report.
Anything else from any of the township professionals, Mr. Chinaski? Any, Mr. Bongiorno?
I'm going to hold some comments towards later in the meeting.
Okay. All right, reports of township officials. Ms. Dalton, would you like to go first?
Sure, and just briefly, because I'm cognizant of the time, I just wanted to repeat what Mr. Chernecki said regarding the weather situation. I was among some of the residents that had no power until late Friday afternoon, and I wanted to make sure that it was understood that really I thought the DPW, the police, all of the people in emergency response in the town did an excellent job. Our streets were cleaned, trees were out of the way, whereas, across the county, there were some much more significant problems. So the lighting or the electricity problem was not within the control of the township, and I wanted to just make sure that we thanked everyone. I know that the senior services was still open despite having no power. They did makeshift services here in this chambers, and I think everybody pulled together and did a great job. It was a pretty rough week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, for me personally and for the whole town.
Anything else, Ms. Dalton, for other
No,
reports?
that's it.
Mr. Howell?
Mayor, I was wondering if I could address to the manager, we had spoken at the last meeting about the VFW and taking over the OEM building.
Yep.
And I was wondering if you had gotten any further information on that.
No, I think that's going to require a policy discussion
I
at
can
the council
actually
level.
comment on that, because I went back and did my research. The council was approached by the VFW, and I think Mr. Walsh, Mrs. Showmaker, and I may have been the only ones that were here. The township was going to sell the OEM building, and prior to doing it, there were concerns about whether or not it made sense to sell it due to its strategic location next to the school board headquarters, and might that be an area that at some point we may need from an expansion perspective. And Commander Ben Novick of the VFW was aware of these ongoing discussions and approached the council and said, look, we don't have a meeting place. The Veterans of Foreign War, which is a large chapter in Howell Township that certainly needs little introduction with respect to the people that are members of that fine organization and what they're deserving of. And so it was decided that without making any investments with respect to infrastructure, that once the Office of Emergency Management vacated the building, that we would allow them to use the facility for meetings, because they're looking for a place to have meetings. They don't have such a location today. And they agreed that at their own expense, with the various retired members of their organization, they could make minor carpentry upgrades and install carpeting and use it as potentially a place to have a headquarters for the Veterans of Foreign War from our own municipality. And so since we were reluctant to sell the land because of its proximity to the Board of Education, it was the collective judgment of the council at the time to in fact agree to do that. We would still maintain the ownership of the building, and we felt that at the time an appropriate lease arrangement could be constructed for some ridiculous amount of $1 or whatever the case might be. The building, according to the township's officials at the time, really had little use to the township. It wasn't large enough to relocate the engineering office. There was nothing we could legitimately do with it, and rather than forego the land, we felt it would be practical to hold on to it and at the same time help the VFW with a very serious issue that they had. As early as March 3rd, 2006, when Mr. Chernetsky came on board, and this is not an indication on him, I had a memorandum to the township manager, and in fact, the fifth item was the retrofitting of the OEM building and turning it over to the Howell VFW along with a lease agreement. And Mr. Davis, his predecessor, was to have been working on that, and I don't know what the status of it was. In large measure, it was on hold because there were delays in getting the OEM to their new building. Notably, they didn't have the necessary equipment they needed to actually occupy the new building. So as early as March 3rd of 2006, at least three of us that were up here all got this memorandum listing it as one of many initiatives that the township had ongoing. And we all got a nice piece of correspondence from Commander Novick just sort of inquiring, when may they be able to actually begin to occupy the building. All they're looking for, it's a group of war heroes that want to get together and have a place to meet. And I couldn't think of a more deserving group than these fine individuals, particularly since it was the collective judgment of the municipality that we couldn't use the building. So I think all we need to do is, I think in fairness to the new council members that weren't here for that, it was appropriate that you at least get some sense of the background and the recollection. Mr. Davis may have something in his file, if you will, with respect to correspondence that might be worthy of attempting to pull the file. It would be my hope that we would continue down the path of agreement that we had with Post 9691, since the agreement was we weren't going to incur any expense and they had to have a place to have their meetings. So in fairness to Mr. Howell and Mrs. Dalton, I understood this came up after I left the budget meeting. Had I been here then, I would have been able to give you the explanation.
Okay.
But that honestly is that's the whole issue in a nutshell. Now, Mr. Chernetsky, is the OEM, I mean, it's certainly the council's prerogative to change that policy decision and maybe not have them use that facility. I would hope that that isn't the case. But where is OEM with respect to vacating out of the building?
They have purchased storage trailers, and so they're moving equipment out. And the conversation has sort of, I guess, come to a head in a sense because we are in a budget process, and we heard from the Buildings and Grounds Department that to renovate that building and bring it up to code for a municipality, which
Right.
we are the owners, would not be insignificant in a neighborhood of, I think it was about $160,000.
Yeah. We got that same recommendation at the time, and it was really it was the collective sense of the council that it didn't make sense to make an investment in the building because we didn't need to use it, but the land was too valuable because of its proximity to the school board to turn it over to somebody else. And if the OEM had been able to use it under its current condition without real interruption or problem, why couldn't the VFW similarly have an opportunity to use it? And if there were minor refinements that they could make at their expense, what would be the difficulty, if you will, provided they were willing to use the facility as it currently exists?
I believe, though, when we discussed it, they said to bring it up to code today would be at least $160,000. So we couldn't lease it to them for $1 as is. We would have to do all the renovations.
I think
If that's the case, then that's changed, because, I mean, wouldn't we be in conflict today if we have people using it and it is up to code? What would be the issue having to bring it up to code now if we've been using a building that's not been up to code for all these years?
Right. Well, Buildings and Grounds has a responsibility to bring forward,
Okay.
their request for the year for things that they want to do, and they need funding, and so...
But is there any statutory issue that says before the VFW could have meetings there, that we'd have to spend $160,000 on the building? Because if it is, we're in big trouble when it
Right.
comes to the engineering building down the street.
That's why I indicated it is an item for discussion. The council's strategy with respect to capital items is, once we hear from all the departments, we're going to list them and we're going to prioritize them. And, council's going to give itself a budget and
But I don't know-
may decide to give some seed money, or I don't
Yeah,
know.
I guess my only concern is, in fairness, and it could be my fault, I might not have articulated the question, do we have a statutory obligation to make improvements to that building
I think
so people could continue to use it?
As long as we own a building, we're liable for its compliance with all applicable, OSHA and all other standards.
So then we're in big trouble, because the engineering building, we know, is probably a building that should be shut down tomorrow, and we have emergency management people using the building today, and it's in terrible condition, so I guess I'm just confused.
All right, man, if I could, just in fairness, this wasn't to try to not give them the building.
I understand.
It was just the question came up during the budget, and there was a line item on there that said $160,000 for improvements, and I said, for what?
I was equally as surprised, because our agreement was we couldn't afford to spend any money on it. I guess my very specific question is, we're using the building today, and there are obviously issues with it.
But, Mayor, actually, the building's not being used today. It hasn't been used for some time. It's
So the
used for
OEM
storage, right? They don't meet there, they don't operate out of there. It's been a while since they've done that.
The building has not had heat for 3 years.
Yeah, which the VFW was aware of, because you were at those meetings when they
Right.
came here. They were willing to get any place to meet.
The description from Buildings and Grounds, as I recall off the top of my head, is that, you need the heat, in order to meet standards, the floor needs to be reinforced. It's still on a septic system, it needs to be connected to the sewers right next door. There's an oil tank that needs to be removed. The handicap ramp does not meet code, and on and on and on and on.
wasn't that brought up at the time?
Yeah, I guess the issue then I would have is, why at the time did management say that we could, in fact, let the VFW begin to use the building once OEM moved its stuff out of it?
Well, I don't think anybody here, other than at the time, me knowing that there was no heat in the building because the furnace had actually split. The air exchange or whatever had split, and so that exhaust would go into vents. I was not aware of anything. I'm not on OEM. I was aware of the heat problem. I wasn't aware of any other problems with the buildings at the time to,
Okay, so that's the
red
answer.
flag and bring it up.
No one raised that there were these other problems. So what do we do, Mr. Chinyetsky?
Well, Mayor, I wasn't asking council to make a decision this evening, so I'm not prepared to
Okay.
discuss it, frankly.
Are you,
Mayor, I wasn't, I was just trying to find out if we had gotten to a point of why we had to spend that money. Because I was under the same understanding that you were, was that we were just going to give them the keys.
that's correct. That's my understanding. And I'd like to still pursue, why couldn't we do that? I mean, if they're willing to accept it on an as-is condition, and it's for their private meeting purposes, I mean, it's probably not an issue that can be resolved now. When do you think that you may be able to get back to us with some update on that, Mr.
Well, I'm
Chair?
trying to schedule a meeting with them. I will tell you, Mayor, I was involved with when I first started, I worked in Montville Township, and there was the old library that a seniors club took over, that the township owned it. It was in pretty bad shape. It needed some work, and what the town did was provided some seed money with the promise of some volunteer effort, and council members and department heads all showed up in the evenings, and we all chipped in, and we got the building functioning, and we applied for community development block grants, that sort of thing. So, since you're sort of asking me, that was sort of the road I was going down, but we would have to flush that out a little more.
Mayor, do you think it would be possible, I know at the same time that the American Legion from Howell and Farmingdale is also trying to find a place. Maybe we could get with the commander of the American Legion, get the American Legion commander and the
That's a great idea.
VFW commander together, see if they would be agreeable to split, the use of the building. I know that that's done in some towns.
I think them sharing it, I don't think anyone should have an objection to that concept. So the first step is you're looking into what can they do in terms of using it on an immediate basis. Is that right? Among other things.
I think immediate would be a little optimistic, given what I understand the needs of the building are at this point.
Okay.
I mean, given the lateness, that's all I have.
Okay. Mrs. Showmaker, do you have any comments?
Real quick, I received a letter from maybe all of you did, for the Howell Township Education Foundation, and they were kind enough to send 2 tickets to their Howell Township Education Gala Art Auction, which I am not privileged to accept. However, I give them to one of the citizens out in the audience to enjoy. Under our rules of play to pay, I'm unable to accept the tickets, but thank you anyway. I hope that whoever picked them up enjoys them. Just a request for Mr. Zernicki. I would like to have, just remind you that in writing, I would like to know from DPW report on the snow removal from last year's budget. Also, I think that it is, after listening to the conversation, I would like to, Helene, I don't know how hard this is going to be, I really would like the minutes from the conversation that was taken in this room in regards to the OEM building and the American Legion, because there was a long dialogue that went on there, and I think that we need to see that in writing, because it's very conflicting stories now, and it just makes me a little uncomfortable on what direction, it was inclinated to us, what could be done and what we're doing, so
Okay.
I don't know how hard that would be.
You mean, Councilwoman, you mean, Mayor, if I may,
Please, go right ahead.
you mean the original conversation going back a few years?
It was...
Or 2 years ago?
It was this last year, I think, beginning of last year, maybe like a year ago.
I mean, if we polled maybe Mr. Davis's file on this particular issue, it might lead us a trail to what meeting date it was actually talked about.
Okay.
And maybe there's some paper trail, because I agree with Mrs. Showmaker, when this came up, it was,
It's a complete
now,
different-
looking back at it, I get the impression it's like, once again, no good deed goes unpunished. Because when it came up, it was, what a great idea, we can help these veterans, they can have a place to meet, we're not using the building, we're not going to sell it, and now it's sort of taking a different score.
Understood.
One more quick comment. I am in receipt of the letter from the Census Bureau. Are we going to participate in this? Because sometimes this benefits to the community. Will we as a community?
I did get a copy of that letter, Mrs. Showmaker, and I handed it off to the clerk's office and the manager and asked that we participate for that same purpose.
Okay. The only other comment I have is I see Mrs. Crummins in the audience, and I'm sure that I know that she's here in regards to an update on the Lackey property, and I'm not sure if Mr. Bongiovanni is handling that.
Mr. Gannon's handling it.
Mr. Gannon's handling it, but just for the record, periodically I do ask for the receipts for the garbage removal, and as of this date, I've yet to receive even photostatic copies of that. So if, once again, I can put that request in, I would like to have the receipts for the removal of the, whatever you want to call that, garbage on the Lackey property, as per the court order. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Okay. Mr. Walsh, you have any comments on your reports?
I also was without heat and electric last week for a few days. I think it was a tough week overall in the town between the two horrific deaths. A lot of people without power, without heat, and I think our township, the manager, police department, OEM. Can't hear me, Vinny? But I think they all did a fantastic job. I drove around town because I couldn't do much in my own house. Stopped in some different places, went to the Board of Ed, PD, checked out the shelter that they had set up for emergency for people from town. And I would like us to look into doing that. Councilman Howell discussed it with me with the Board of Ed, seeing if we can do that with is that the verse 911?
Right.
And because a lot of people weren't able to be contacted last week who were without heat and electric. I stopped at some houses over on Merrick Road. I'm sure there's other seniors that didn't have access. They don't use cell phones, they don't have computers. I really think there's something we need to do in order to ensure that everybody can be contacted during an emergency situation. As part of the shared services, I think that we ought to be doing with all different agencies throughout the state, county, and locally. It's something we seriously have to look into. For me, I had to do without a couple things. I wondered what kind of pull Councilwoman Schumacher has, because she had heat up the block and electric, and me, 12 houses away, had none. So it was something I was going to ask the manager about, but he said he had a little bit of a tough day.
It's my relationship with the Father above.
But it was a tough week in town, and I think a lot of our emergency services really stepped up. The police were out all over the place. We had a big discussion last week about overtime. I could see last week when a lot of overtime was needed by a lot of different agencies in Howell Township, and they were necessary, and for the well-being of the citizens of Howell. Because of the lateness of time, Mayor, I'll stop there.
Do you have something else, Mrs. Trailmaker? Go ahead.
Something you said sparked my interest. I know, Mayor, that, and probably all of us received an email that was forwarded to us from the young lady who is the unfortunate tragedy we have here in our community with losing her mother and her father. And I know that our community really stepped up to the plate and went out of state to help. I just was wondering if there's something, if someone in our community has reached out to her in some way, or what is it that we can do to help this? I don't even know how old this girl is.
High school.
She's in high school. Anyway.
But it was a letter from another student. It was extremely heartache reading it. And I just wondered, and as a community, we go outside to help also, is there any way that we can reach out? Because this is a tragedy in our community that we don't often, and let's hope not ever, see again. But I think it's incumbent to us to reach out in some way, if we can, to help this young woman. I just don't know what it is that we can do, Mayor.
Yeah, I'm not completely certain either.
Mayor, there are some, I had inquired with the police department. There are some things that have been extended, other things we're working on, and I prefer not to discuss it too publicly, though.
If you could just reach out to me
Yes,
that I know how I can, what avenue I need to go to on a personal level, I would appreciate that. Thanks, Tom.
Yes,
Do you have
ma'am.
anything else, Mr. Walsh?
No, Mayor.
Okay. I also just wanted to echo my God bless you. My thanks to Ron Sanisak, Emergency Management, Police, the First Aid Squads, the fire companies. I talked more to Mr. Chunietsky that week and that handful of days than I think I did in the entire time he's been here. He took my calls late in the evening, early in the morning, and we were all very, very concerned. I am, quite frankly, a little concerned about JCP&L's response. I don't want to be overcritical because we don't have all the facts, but it begs the question about their emergency preparedness in the event that a different kind of situation, one that might not have been caused by nature, could, God forbid, ever strike our community or others, and what kind of resources they have to pull into a situation like this. And the only criticism I do have, at least according to the press accounts, were that it was only after almost 48 hours that they began to recruit resources from contiguous states to come in an effort to try and help the situation in our own community. And frankly, I think that's really a reflection of perhaps a faulty emergency management plan. But if those kind of resources are available and 50,000 people are without power, I think in these kinds of conditions, with the cold weather the way that it existed and the magnitude of that storm, I think we should demand more of JCP&L or any utility that in fact takes 48 hours to deploy resources that were readily available in another state that were not going through a similar crisis. Lord knows we all pay a very high price in utility fees, and quite frankly, the way that the system is set up, we have very little to say about how those prices are even constructed and who gets to approve them. It's an elite group called the Board of Public Utilities, and we've seen what they've done to us with the Parkway Water Company and other situations. And so I'm hoping that at the right time, we'll get a more transparent explanation from JCP&L around their, at least in my humble judgment, inability to adequately respond with the right level of resources to many people who were in a very, very serious situation. The concern I had that I shared with Mr. Chunietsky, we had set up an emergency situation room or emergency situation conditions at the middle school. We did so at the building here, the rec building, and it was, people could go online and check to see if it was available, and they can turn on their television, but I kept coming back to, but if they don't have power, they can't look on TV, and they can't check the internet, and if their telephone service could also be down, we have a serious problem. So how are these people even going to find out about it? And Mr. Howell apparently has an idea that the board uses some outbound phone system, and I agree. We need to look into that as well. But clearly, and I don't want to be overly critical of JCP&L, I think they need to do a very serious postmortem about their ability to respond, because in my judgment as mayor, I'm not satisfied with how they handled the situation. I just had a couple other quick comments. At the last meeting, Mr. Bongiovanni was kind enough to give us a memo on this tonight. There was some discussion about, from a parliamentary procedure, the limitations on debate. And I think it was explained to me that when someone uses the vernacular call to question, we need to stop and actually take a vote. And I come to find out that that's actually incorrect. And the appropriate parliamentary procedure is someone can actually ask to place a limit on the debate or to have the question called, but that needs to be seconded. And after it's seconded, then there can be comments and remarks with respect to whether the council would actually like to close debate. And I read right from Robert's Rules of Order, their second and simplified and amplified edition, that actually indicates that. And it certainly is a presiding question, if you will. But to the best of my knowledge, to Robert's rules, there does need to be a second. Someone just can't say, I call the question, and that stops the debate. And I don't want to belabor the point, but we have an obligation also under Robert's rules to protect the interests of the minority. And when there is a debate going on, I think only after a very material amount of time should that debate be stopped. And should someone who would like to be heard on an issue be prevented from speaking. And I was prevented from speaking. And I'm actually pretty ticked off about it. I was elected just the way everybody else was. And if I want to say my piece, I'm going to say it. And if somebody doesn't like it, that's too bad. So when I go back and I look at Robert's rules, and I'll never stop someone from having an opportunity to talk up here, whether I agree with them or not. According to Robert's rules, a member must make a motion. The presiding officer cannot cut off the debate as long as one member wishes to rise and speak. Neither can one member stop the debate yelling out, "Question," or "It's time to call the question." Only the motion to limit debate can limit debate, and a debate can be closed only by the motion. It needs to be seconded. Someone could certainly, at that point in time, vote to overrule having the call to question. They could vote to not stop the debate, but I'm concerned that at the last meeting, I sort of was led to believe that I had to immediately call the question, and I went along with it because it seemed maybe it was practical. But when I gone back and looked at it, and I think Mr. Bongiovanno's memo also supports it, I just don't want to see us get in a situation where we don't like what someone's saying, we disagree with them, so we're going to try and shut them down by saying we're going to call the question. And I hope that isn't a practice that I'm going to have to get accustomed to in the next 2 years.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, on my own initiative, since nobody asked me to do it, that's what I mean by my own initiative, I drafted this memo. And also, you may recall at the break or towards the end of the meeting, we went over the differences between Robert's Rules of Order and Howell's administrative section of the code, the Administration of Government, Chapter 2. And it says that Robert's rules apply except as herein otherwise provided. So that means when our administrative rules, like rules of debate, are in conflict with Robert's rules, well, that's not unfortunate, it's just a fact that Howell's code applies. So that's why I said there is a difference between the two, and when there is, we have to refer to our code. And specifically, it says in Section 2-5I, paragraph 10, regarding rules of debate, when a question is presented and seconded, that's like saying, I call the question, I second. It is under consideration and no motion shall be received thereafter except to adjourn, to lay on the table, to postpone, or amend until the question is decided. So, under our rules, let's say a person during a debate says, well, I call the question. What they're saying is that opinion is, by that member, that debate has been exhausted. That's why the rule exists anyway.
Of course.
Under Howell's ordinance, once that happens, there has to be a vote on the motion unless somebody else proposes a motion to adjourn, to lay on the table or table, to postpone or amend the motion. If none of those things are done, then the question has been called, and they have a right to, and the seconder have a right to have a vote on it. So
Here's the only problem.
That's the way the ordinance works.
I mean, here's the only problem. Even in your example, I call the question, I second. At our last meeting, there was a failure for a second on the call to question.
I think maybe somebody did second, but we'd have to have the minutes.
I don't know of anyone.
That
That may have been the case.
I think they did, but
if there was such a second, I take chairing a meeting pretty serious. I can tell you, I would have acknowledged there was a motion and a second.
Okay.
So that's a concern, and I appreciate. So your recommendation is the ordinance has these procedures and we should follow them.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
We could change the ordinance, but the ordinance says when it's in conflict with Robert's rules,
Of course.
the ordinance applies.
The other observation I have, in light of your observation that we should follow the code, is that the code also says that a member may only speak once on the same subject.
That's right.
During debate.
And that's in my memo.
It is, and so I would attest that there are flaws with respect to this, because I would never limit a member of this council, or any council, whether I'm in the majority or minority, to being heard once on a particular issue.
On a motion.
On a motion or on anything.
Yeah.
If Mrs. Dalton or Mrs. Showmaker wanted to continue to make their point, it would be completely inappropriate for me to say, well, the ordinance says you can only talk once, and so we're moving on.
Well, the Roberts rules say, as you pointed out, say you could speak twice.
It does.
So
I guess
Robert's
the point
rule
I'm
says
making
twice,
is that since Robert's
ours
rules,
say once.
I think the point I'm making is that we need to have the inherent flexibility to understand we've got Robert's Rules of Order. There's an expectation the chair is going to run the meeting. I was very unhappy that after a very limited debate on a topic that was important to me personally, I was cut off. There was a call to question, and it was an urgency and a rush to get something done before I had a chance to finish my piece. And I just want to make sure, because it has bothered me since I left this chamber a week ago, because in the 4 years I've been here, when Tim Konopka was mayor, there was many times he and I agreed, there were many times he and I disagreed. But to his credit, he never once tried to pull a stunt where anybody was cut off because he had the right to run the meeting. And we afforded him the same respect. And I'm just hoping that that's not the culture that is going to permeate. And I'm suspecting it's not. But I'd be less than candid if I didn't acknowledge that I was more than perturbed about it, particularly when I went back and was very copious about my recollection that there wasn't a second, and that we acted in a way, cut off debate, had limited participation on it, and I'm not happy about it.
Well,
If we're going to follow the rules of our administrative code, we can follow them, but I think that the council is going to be very unhappy, because there's a whole bunch of limitations in here that I'm not comfortable enforcing as chair.
There's another one, which I mentioned in the memo. When a member has been recognized and has the floor, he shall not be interrupted unless he's called to order. So the mayor, the presiding officer, maybe the mayor, it could be, in your absence, the deputy mayor, he has a right to say, let's move on, you're out of order, you're done speaking. But it also gives the council the right to appeal that decision.
Absolutely.
By a majority vote. So there is some flexibility built into the ordinance, but keep in mind that since in looking this way, I didn't make the motion or the second.
Of course not.
And I was just trying to say that's what our ordinance.
The good news is you're not one of the elected officials. You didn't make the motion, you didn't stop the debate. If I'm looking your way, in fact, I want to thank you for taking the time on your own to give us this memo. I'd be hard-pressed to
There's some other
suggest-
stuff in it that might be helpful, too.
I thought it was terrific, and I sincerely appreciate your taking the time to do it. I've made my piece. I don't want to belabor it any further. I'm just going to be honest. I don't expect to be shut down. I don't expect anyone else in this council to be shut down. Whether we agree or disagree, we got a right to be heard. And I will refuse to have my rights as an individual member of this governing body not be heard. I was elected to do my job, and I'm going to do it. And I won't let anyone else have their rights be denied either. That's all I had under reports. Anything else, Mr. Czerniecki? No, sir. Let's go back to the agenda. We've got a couple of items. You know what, before we do that, Mr. Czerniecki, there's one other quick thing I think we could dispose of. I saw on the agenda that there's a question around environmental commission appointments. It happens to be the case, and I'm not certain if anyone's had a chance to look at it, that it is, it's New Jersey statute that it is the authority of the mayor to appoint environmental commissioners. Is that right?
New Jersey State statute.
I don't know for certain. I did a cursory look this evening, and it does appear that way, but there's so many different forms that I think perhaps council would request an opinion from the attorney.
So we're going to pay somebody to tell us whether or not that
I'll look it up without any.
I got to ask the question, what precipitated this in the many years I've been coming here? Mayor Konopka appointed him, Harvey Morell did it before him.
Okay.
I was actually
Under
asked
state law.
to appoint a certain member to the Environmental Commission. It wasn't on my short list, and I did so in good faith in cooperation with the council. So I don't even know how this got on the agenda.
Mayor, in order to try to facilitate the meetings, to make the meetings a little more structured, and I harken back to Mr. Howell's and the VFW issue. What I'm encouraging council members to do is to let me know if there are items for discussion that they would like to have on the agenda, so that we deal with them at the appropriate time on the agenda. You know, obviously, you know, Mayor, it's your call what gets discussed and where. But that is something I had suggested in the past. The deputy mayor contacted me with the items that are under discussion, and I wrote you a quick memo in your packet explaining that. So you would have to inquire
Okay.
to
Mr.
deputy
Chairman, do you
mayor.
have a comment?
But frankly, I didn't research it. I didn't look into it. I just listed it because it was requested to come up for discussion.
That brings something to mind. What is the protocol for that? Because I recall back last October or November, I wanted something put on for discussion, and you, the manager, told me that I had to go before the rest of the council before it was put on for discussion. That was when Juan Malave was here, because I personally called all of them, and then I got so frustrated, I just said, I'm not going to go through that. But I do. So I would like the protocol set while we're discussing that. Exactly what is the protocol to have something put on the agenda, and who does do that? Who makes that call?
It was my recollection that we, as a council, had talked about, and we even talked about it with the new council, that when somebody wanted something to be added to the agenda, we'd bring it up here, and we'd talk about it and say, let's add it to the agenda. Rather than, I mean, Mrs. Showmaker decided she wanted to add to the agenda that she wanted to give everybody back a, $1,000 rebate out of the kindness of her heart, so let's add it to the agenda. I don't know that we would do that, in spite of the fact it might be a nice idea. But I had thought our protocol was, when somebody wanted something added to the agenda, we'd bring it up as a collective group and say, I got something I want to bring up. They could bring it up under reports and say, I'd like us to set aside some time to talk about it. Because I look at the Environmental Commission issue, and only because I happen to know it is the law, I mean, it's, in my view, it's not an effective use of our time, because it has been documented when the clerk's office actually publishes the agenda on January 1st, they actually note the citation upon which, under this council manager form of government, it actually speaks specifically to the authority of the mayor to appoint environmental commissioners. So I'm just at a loss, to Mrs. Showmaker's point, how that's changed. Now, the way to get something on the agenda is to just put in a memo and say, I want to talk about it, and this one in particular. I mean, it's...
Maybe, Mr. Mayor, if we were adhering to the agenda, this was all the way at the end.
Correct.
And based on what we've got to do with the rest of the evening, I'm pretty sure we would have either not reached it. I only found out about it today at 3 o'clock. And it would have been a lot easier just to table it for another time.
Except though,
I'm
Mr.
just suggesting
Mangiapane,
that maybe-
let me finish. Except though, and I appreciate your pointing out that I guess in your judgment, I'm bringing this up at the wrong time, and quite frankly, I don't know that I'm interested in your opinion on policy as much as I am on legal issues. So you might want to refrain from jumping in on how I'm going to conduct the agenda, because it is not a legal issue, and I don't want to hear from you on it. That's the first issue, because I don't appreciate the sort of underlying tone of which your comment was intended to represent, because I get it. The second issue is, it is on the agenda, and I don't know why it's on our agenda, because we do have a stacked agenda. And there should be things on our agenda that require the business of the council. And I don't think one person should say, I want it to be looked into, and it gets looked into. I think these collective decisions have to be made as a body. And we're only together for a couple of months, and we got to work through some of these issues so we know how to work with one another.
Well, Mayor, if council wishes to give me direction, I'd appreciate that. My point was, when a council member calls me to say they want something on the agenda, that's appreciated more than...
Of course.
And Mr. Howell, please don't take this personally, but, to bring up the VFW thing, where we're not ready to discuss it, isn't something that makes us look terribly professional as a staff. I understand your concern and your interest, but I would prefer to get a call to say, I would like to discuss this, so I can properly put it down for discussion, and I can anticipate it. So, if council wants to give some direction as to nothing gets put on for discussion, unless you all vote on it, that I look to you to tell me how you want to approach these things.
See, for me, I'm the one who brought it up, and the reason I brought it up, just like the mayor just said, we need to make collective decisions as a body. And I've asked some other municipalities and in different forms of government, I always wondered why in Howell, in this form of government, did it have to be that the mayor appointed the environmental commission? Was it statutory, or is it just the way things have gone on here? So if it's not statutory, I'd like it looked into. I'd like to know why. Because I do believe we should make as many collective decisions as a body as possible. After all, we're supposed to be 5 servants of the people.
So we're going to look into it, and we'll rack up some taxpayer expense to find out that the law says...
Again, let me just get back, Mayor, to my point. It's on for discussion, and if you read the memo, the direction to, the recommendation to council is that this was requested. You have to give me guidance whether you want us to do that or not as a body.
Okay.
Mr.
All right.
Mayor, I'd be happy to pull the statute for free.
I'd be happy if you would do it for free.
I was volunteering to do that before, too,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
All right, let's go back to our next order of business. We have hearing and citizens. We've got several people who have signed up. Mr. Lariah, you're up first. Welcome, sir. Is the cordless microphone ready, Ms. Woolman? Okay. If anyone has difficulty getting up to the front of the room. We do have a cordless microphone for your convenience. Good evening, Mr. Lariah. Welcome.
Terrible time here. Vince Lariah, 56C, the Villages. Primarily, I want to just plead to the council that before you accept any of the revaluations, that you consider that there may be some...
Mr. Lariah, could you just see, is the red button on in front of your microphone? Would you just either push down the button or if you...
This one has.
Okay.
Again, addressing the revaluation.
Could you just pull it a little bit closer? I'm sorry, Mr. Lariah.
So what?
A little
Can you hear
closer.
it back?
There you go. That should do it.
With regard to revaluations, I'm coming to the council to ask that you, how about now?
Underneath,
there's a...
Underneath, Benny, there's a switch.
I can yell.
Oh, it is on.
It was on. It's like you're at a press conference.
I can hear that.
There we go.
Thank you. Ready?
Go for it.
Again, the revaluation. I'm telling you, I'm coming to you to ask that you review all the criteria that the revaluating company is using for establishing the value of our homes. Now, let me just, a quick example. We have a unit in the Villages that was valued by the new revaluation $165,000. A comparable unit, pristine, just sold for $135,000. It just scares me that the basis of some of our valuations are going to relate to what was happening a year ago when everybody was going crazy and buying like mad. Keep that in the forefront when we come to the point of accepting the revaluations. The second point on revaluation I have is residents throughout the community are not all the same. For example, in the Villages, if our home is valued at $200,000, and then another house within outside of the Villages community is also valued at $200,000, it's not likely that the community, the house in the Villages is going to be selling for that amount. What I'm trying to say is one size does not fit all. Our customers, or people who will be interested in coming to the Villages, is perhaps half of the same population that will be looking for a home outside the Villages. So therefore, the valuation ought to be adjusted relative to the type of customer population that would be interested. And finally, on the storm, we suffered about a half-hour power outage. After about the first 10 minutes, I started to sweat because you know that we have people in the community who start panicking when there's no solution, no rescue on the way. We came through fine. We had none of the situations that you folks did, but we were worried. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Lariah. Mrs. Dixell, you're up next, ma'am. Good evening, Mrs. Dixell.
Barbara Dixell, The Villages. Regarding the Freehold Township meeting that I went to with Mr. Nunziata regarding Halls Mill Road, I did give Mrs. Schumacher a copy. I've now made copies for everybody. I will give it out. Again, it's still my recommendation to Joe Ettore, who's the Monmouth County engineer, that they either move the 3-light sign closer to County Road 524 and Wyckoff Road so people can see it better, or that they put up a blinking light, some kind of blinking sign with lights on it that people can actually see, because you can't see going around that turn. And, you know, and then you get all the screeching brakes, and you don't know that there's a traffic light. And in the summertime, when the trees are all blooming, for sure you don't see it. So, again, I have calls into him on a regular basis. We'll see. Hopefully they'll do it. JCP&L, well, we've all gotten a $60 rate increase just within the last bill or so. Not getting any more services for it, but we just got a $60 increase. Also, the Board of Ed, yes, they do have an emergency phone system that they can call their entire population within a very short time. And you might want to look into that. And I understand it wasn't very costly, but I remember that from a year or two ago, that they have that system.
Mayor, if I could.
Please, go right ahead, sir.
Mrs. Dixell, they do not currently have the reverse 911. They were trying to
They
get it
have
into
some
their
kind of a
budget.
phone system that they can call
They
them.
have a phone chain where I
something.
call you, you call them. They are interested in partnering with the township. And Mayor, I had also asked Mr. Zanazak to see if the mayor of Farmingdale, as well as the Board of Ed of Farmingdale, will be willing to partner,
Join
because
in.
they obviously couldn't purchase it on their own.
But they said to me a while ago that they have some kind of a system that they can call all kinds of parents.
They do, it's a phone chain. I call you, you
Oh,
call
okay, I don't know,
somebody.
but they said there was some kind of a
Mrs. Dixell,
system that they had.
they have a system where through each of the PTAs, they have a class list for every class, for any
I just
family
thought
that
there was
is
some
willing
kind
to
of a system that
participate.
they had.
And they make it's a great system because they manage to get to a lot of people, but it certainly isn't foolproof.
Okay, another thing I want to bring up is I constantly have a thing with the planning board office and the zoning board office. For some reason, I just don't get planning board agendas or zoning board agendas. And you've heard me bring this up before. And not the first time I've said this. Please, somebody. I mean, if there was a planning board meeting last week, I didn't know about it. I never got it. I usually like to try coming to these things. I know you had no power or whatever, but I don't know if there was or there wasn't, but I don't get agendas. Sometimes I have to call up and get them faxed to my house. Why?
They're on the internet. I know
I don't
that.
care whether they're on the internet or not. I'm on the mailing list, period. And half the time, my PDF and it doesn't work. It freezes. So I wind up having to call tech support in India to go get help, to go get the PDF to work. You know? All I want to do is get what I'm entitled to get. I mean, I get township agendas. Why don't I get planning board agendas? I keep asking that question. Okay. With regard to the article that was in the paper last week about trying to preserve the property for open space, that we were trying to get the county to buy this piece of land in between the villages and Dion. Does anybody have any idea, is the township willing to do anything to help purchase this thing for open space?
Council willing to entertain Mrs. Dixell's question?
To try and preserve this river from the drinking water, Manasquan, from getting clear cut and trees taken down and having flooding going through the town, and it's just a shame. It's just a pity. I don't have any problem with this guy owning this property and trying, you know, he has a right to own his property, but please, in just in the name of trying to save your drinking water, can somebody offer some kind of help to try and buy the piece of property and save it for open space? Or save it and preserve it so you'll have drinking water when you turn your faucet on? No?
What's the pleasure of the
I
council?
don't know. I've asked them.
Mayor, I think, you know, I don't even know if the property's for sale, if the person.
It is
owns
for sale.
Is it for sale or sold?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but from what I understand, the owner wants to put a furniture store there.
So it's,
I don't know. I have
You
no
don't know
idea.
if it's for sale?
I don't know if it's already a done deal.
I don't know either.
I don't know either. But the shame of it all is that this beautiful river, it's this beautiful river, and coming up to where it meets Dion's and the villages and where the river is maybe environmentally unstable, and the land may possibly be environmentally unfit for development. Is it possible that if they do put a building on that site, is it possible that they may have to sink piles in the ground to sustain the building? I don't know. I have no idea.
Have there been any discussions with the county about this, Mr. Schleck? I'm just asking, I don't know.
I understand Ms. Dixell and Mr. Costigan have reached out to the county, and I think what you reported was there perhaps some interest in the areas immediate to the banks of the water. Was that my understanding?
From what I understand, the county did reach out to the gentleman, and I don't know if he was willing to even talk to the guy about selling it, but the lady from the Land for Public Trust, Kathy Hake, said, that, it was a worthwhile thing to try and do, to have somebody try to buy this beautiful, pristine, virgin, uncut forest that we know has a deer herd, that we know has turtles, that we know because they come into the villages, and there's always deer tracks all over the villages on the forest side, and that a few turtles come out of the water and meander over to the villages lake and then go back into the river. But it's just a pity to destroy this magnificent piece of land. Another thing, because I was just curious, okay, with regard to the coming land use ordinances that are coming up, I tried pulling some of them off the net. I'm not a land use expert. I don't understand a lot of this stuff. So can I ask the council that when this comes up for the vote, because I know you're going to introduce them tonight, when it comes up for the vote and the hearings, because they're very complex, can you, on each ordinance, give us an in-depth explanation as to what they are,
Barbara.
what your plans to change are you going to put anything in these ordinances that don't exist in them now, and why? And will you be sending notices of 200 feet in either direction to every citizen that will be affected by this in the Township of Howell?
I think, Mrs. Dixell, we will absolutely ask the manager upon, after, they're obviously introduced as a formality, but when we begin the debate, and we have the public hearing, we'll certainly ask the manager to give a complete overview of all of the specifics in layperson's terms, because we need that same benefit as you do.
Will the taxpayers in these particular zones be notified, as per the Cox book, 200 feet in either direction?
Mr.
all
Chansky,
around?
would you answer Mrs. Dixell's inquiry?
There is one ordinance, the PMU, which will require that because it wasn't part of the master plan reexamination process. But the other ordinance revisions are part of the municipal master plan, and therefore we did a universal notice, and individual notices aren't required.
I'm sorry to differ with you. That was the fiasco when Mr. Newcomb was here the last time, and we had craziness in here. People are entitled to know that their lives are going to change, their property values and the values of their land, and that life as we know it in Howell today is going to change forever. People have a right to that information, and I think it's your moral obligation, as maybe well being your legal obligation, to notify every citizen in this town that's going to be affected by these ordinances. Because when Mr. Newcomb said he sent a super notice, who the hell needs a super notice? People, what happens if they don't turn on the radio? What happens if they don't read the newspaper? How are they going to know their lives just changed?
This is what the law requires. The law requires a specific type of notice. If you're doing a zone change outside of the master plan, then you have to notify the people within 200 feet.
But this is going to affect the master plan.
But now that these zoning ordinances are intended, except for one, to implement the master plan. I would say, too, that every single block and lot where there is a change is listed on the website that the master plan envisioned.
Are you going to notify the Monmouth County Board, Planning Board? I hope?
Yes.
Because it's all, I read
That's
it in this
required.
book. Okay,
Anything
fine.
else, Mrs. Dixell?
Yes, it is. One more thing. Mayor, with regard to I know we had a discussion, we keep having a discussion on this fence thing. I want to make you all understand, it's not me that's asking for this fence. I'm the elected representative, the county committee one from the villages. I get my board of trustees asking me to come before this council and ask about the fence. I have the residents in the villages asking me to come before the governing body and ask for the fence. So when I keep coming before the governing body, I've asked for the fence, and Mayor, you did tell me the last time, because I know we had gotten a letter from Senator Singer saying that we bought our homes in good faith and we're entitled to, he thought we were entitled to have, our quality of life. And your statement to me at that time was, well, since you have such a wonderful relationship with Senator Singer, why don't you ask him to get you the meeting with Lennar? Okay, well, I told him that. And I'm going to read into the record the letter that I just got from him, okay? Because, boy, is this man not happy. I'm in receipt of your letter of February 6, 2007, referencing your issues with Lennar U.S. Homes and the local governing body of Howell. It distresses me a great deal that your local officials are turning a deaf ear to your problems, and I find this perplexing that your governing body will not respond to its constituency. However, the issue which you speak is a local one and should be addressed by your local officials. I would suggest you attend every township meeting and bring up this issue until they do address it. Thank you for sharing your views and concerns with me. Sincerely, Robert W. Singer, Senator, 30th District.
Yeah, Mrs. Dixon, I had an opportunity to talk to Mr. Singer about it. And frankly, when I advised him that the planning board had a specific resolution that approved the application, and that specific resolution did not require the builder to put the fence in. And when I further elaborated to him that the township engineer, at the expense of the taxpayers, went through meeting materials, meetings with you and other individuals, and concluded that no one has actually violated the buffer, at least according to his professional opinion, and I can't comment that, although I trust him, that due diligence was done.
Mayor, I will bring you the maps. I own them, and they're color-coded by the county.
Mrs. Dixon, I'm just going to ask you to let me finish. Unless I'm missing something, and I'll ask Mr. Chernetsky, if you wouldn't mind, to ask Mr. Nunziato to comment. We don't have any legal authority to mandate that the developer come in. Let me finish. We don't have any legal authority to mandate that the developer come in and put a fence. We've asked them to do it. We've begged them to do it. We've been in meetings with them and asked them to do it. And their position has been, we don't have to do it. We have an approval from your planning board that does not require a fence, and they don't want to pay for it. We would love them to pay for the fence. I know Bob Singer would like them to pay for the fence. But in fairness, when I explained to the senator the amount of time that the engineer has put in and other professionals, and that we have no legal standing, but to continue to ask Lennar to do it, but we have no hammer. There's nothing that's outstanding. We can continue to ask him, and I'm certain that we will. But unless I'm missing something, Mr. Nunziato, Mr. Chernetsky, Mr. Bongiovanni, if there's some legal issue that we're missing, is there something we can do to make Lennar put up this fence?
In 2001.
Mrs. Dixell, hold on a minute. Mr. Chernetsky, would you mind if I ask Mr. Nunziato to comment on this?
Bill?
Mr. Nunziato, are we missing anything? Can we force them to put up a fence? Are they in violation, the buffers?
The 50-foot buffer is in effect throughout that perimeter. Unfortunately, the rear yard setbacks are in the buffer. There are no structures. However, the setback lines are physically
In the buffer.
would be in the buffers. However, there are no encroachments in any of the
And you've
lots.
personally checked all these?
I've walked it several times, yes.
Yeah, we walked it.
So no one is encroaching or violating the setback law?
There are no structures or improvements currently within that buffer.
And do we have
correct?
any standing at all, pursuant to the planning board's approval, to make Lennar put up a fence?
No, sir.
Mr. Bongiovanni, any additional legal commentary?
I didn't review their application or anything like that, but I would think that under the circumstances and the time that's gone by and the approval, there'd be no recourse against them.
I understand that. I fully understand that.
Ms. Dixell, let me continue. Does the council have any questions, comments, concerns? What else does the council think that we should do with Lennar at this point? We've asked them, we put it in writing. Mrs. Showmaker, you...
We've done our due diligence. There's
I
nothing more that
understand
we can
Mrs.
do.
Dalton, I mean, you're also an attorney. Let's get some free legal input from you as well.
The only, if I can continue one real
sorry.
quick, if one lesson that we can learn from this is we may want to put a letter together as per the mayor and council to the planning board, enlightening them in this situation, so when they further make application, they can go through the points a little bit closer as to a situation such as this. Because when you're reviewing applications, that's the time where that should have been put in place, if indeed it needed to be done. And they were aware that the rear setbacks were going to encroach into the buffer.
Councilman Schumacher, in 2001, they were permitted under Howell's land
Barbara,
use to do that.
Listen, I know.
In 2002, they passed the ordinance that said they couldn't.
I know exactly what you're saying. I understand where you're coming from.
But the houses where, I mean, you're here and
Barbara,
they're there.
I walked that. I was down
I
there.
know.
I know exactly what you're talking about. However, at this point, there is truly nothing that we can do, and it's unfortunate, other than to bring it to the planning board's attention, this particular situation, so that they can be reminded if it comes up in another application.
Mr. Walsh, you have a comment?
Yeah, I'd like to, I take a little offense to the governing body's done nothing. I mean, that's not fair. I mean, in the 15 months I've been up here, this has been discussed numerous times. With this manager, with the previous manager, with Mr. Nunziata. I mean, other than force the
All I'm
person to
asking
go,
for is a meeting.
Please, Mr. Dixell, please. Other than force them, which we cannot do legally, what more would you want us to do? If there's anything else that you would like us to do,
We're asking for a meeting with them, so we can sit down.
Hold on, Mrs. Dixell. Mr. Walsh has the
Yeah,
floor.
if there's anything else that you would like us to do about this, I have no problem, if it's within our power, to try to do it. Other than that, I mean, I need to know what you want other than accept no and just
I
let
have
it
been
go.
coming up here for all this time to ask for a meeting with Lennar, to sit down with them, with maybe the village's board, to see if they want to be a good neighbor, and maybe we can work together and do this. That's all I'm asking for.
Ask for a meeting with,
I've been asking for this meeting.
I thought we did that.
Can the council and the mayor ask for a meeting with Lennar? Now, if they say no, Mrs. Dixell, what do you expect us
Then
to do?
I guess it's no.
Ask adamantly?
No, I guess it's no.
Okay.
All right, so is it the pleasure of the council that Mr. Chernetsky write a letter to Lennar saying, in spite of the fact you've met with the representatives of the township, the villages would like a meeting with you? We're not going to obviously participate in it, but would you entertain a meeting with Mrs. Dixell and other representatives from the villages? Here's Mrs. Dixell's phone number, her email. She can make a very compelling case. Please contact her and arrange a date.
Mayor, we can try. I will tell you that previous attempts have not been responded
Because I know we've tried to do that.
Okay,
We've
so
tried to
if
make
they
that
don't,
meeting.
then they
Mrs.
don't,
Dixell.
then that's the end of it. There's nothing we can do about it.
Well, just
Thank
let's put it to bed, because
Fine.
we cannot force them to put the fence up.
I agree with you.
Okay.
I agree with you.
Mayor, if I could,
Please.
has that tack been taken where we've asked Lennar to reach out directly to the villages?
Yes.
And what have they said?
Not interested.
Okay.
Well-
And Barbara, have you ever sat up here and said, if Lennar says, I'm not interested, I'm not going to bring it up again?
Say that again, I didn't understand that.
Lennar has already said they're not interested in meeting with the trustees from the villages. They don't want to meet with you. They're not going to put up a fence. I understand you want the fence. I understand you want them to be good neighbors. Obviously, they don't care to be.
Okay.
It's every
That's
week.
fine.
I think we're hamstrung here, where there's no other place to turn. We're
Okay.
running in a round room.
Fine, then other people that come in for ordinances, other people that come in for, like you say, put up developments, make sure that they don't, make sure that these things don't happen, and they don't encroach 2 to 5 to 10 feet in the buffer,
Barbara,
the rear yard setbacks, that people have to watch them eating breakfast, lunch, and supper in their house.
Barbara, I believe that there have been adjustments made, and Mr. Nunziata, through the manager, could correct me if I'm wrong, but we have made adjustments. And I believe even at the planning board level, Mayor, we've even discussed now having the township enact an ordinance which will not allow the buffer to be used as part of the rear yard setback.
That's
So we're going to be
beautiful.
changing,
That's fine. That's
we
fine.
wish to change a lot.
Bless you.
It's hindsight, yes, obviously it is.
Bless
And
you. That's
if there was a
wonderful.
way, if there was a way that we could put the fence up, I'm sure the council would be
Okay,
happy
in
to,
2001,
but-
they were allowed. Okay, I'm
So
saying,
that was
Okay,
6 years
that's
ago.
fine.
We can't rewrite history.
okay, but if you put up an ordinance that says they can't do it now, that's wonderful.
Right.
And the only other one thing I just want to bring up is when these land use ordinances come up, and if there are any challenges to them by citizens of Howell Township, I would like to, it's my opinion that since Mr. Bongiovanni has already sued Howell Township on land use ordinances and has won, and there are people sitting in this room that were represented by him, that he recused himself from sitting on this, and you get a conflict attorney to hear the ordinances.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Dixell.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mayor, can I?
Go ahead,
I'm-
Mr. Chudzinski.
I just want to say, we sit here and we listen to residents, and Ms. Dixell, I don't want you to think we ever forget, that what's important to the village is. We know that a buffer and buffering and privacy is important, and sometimes it's really just a matter of timing. Sometimes, people always come back to you and ask you for things, and to know of what's of interest to the residents of the villages, it's always good to know that. So, although there may not be an immediate opportunity to do something now, we don't forget that that's what you want. And, and if opportunity presents themselves, and more often than not they do, we see it as a great opportunity to ask for things. And I've been doing this long enough to know those opportunities pop up.
Well, okay, in this coming spring, most of the building has already been done on the 3 developments over there. And right now, the 50-foot four-season farm buffer is a bunch of tumbleweed and bramble, and it's a bunch of mess. Come this coming spring, could anybody try to be sure that they absolutely plant a thick 50-foot four-season farm buffer that will give us some peace, maybe?
That is part of the approval.
That's part of the approval, but right now, it's a bunch of bramble.
Right. And
So could somebody try to see that this gets enforced? Or we get some peace?
Do you want to recognize Mr.
Sure.
Newman? Okay.
Barbara, it is a bonded improvement, okay? So it is required to be put in, okay? There are monies to ensure that that does happen. Unfortunately, there is not a time frame to say you have to put it in before the first house is built or after the 10th. It has to be in before we can take over the project. So that, there is an assurance that it will be done. Unfortunately, there is not a timing mechanism by which they're required to put it in.
The only other thing I could say to give us some peace and give us a little bit of privacy is maybe we can get some trees put on the village's side of the, I'm not kidding, put some tall brush and trees on the village's side. Maybe that'll give us a little bit of peace if we can't get it any other way.
Thank you,
Maybe
Mrs.
that's
Dixell.
food for thought. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Cremens. Come on up. Welcome, Mrs. Cremens. It says you'd like to talk about the Lackey property. Mr. Cremens as well. Welcome, sir. I think Mrs. Showmaker anticipated your inquiry. It's always a pleasure to see both Mr. and Mrs. Cremens. Welcome. Mrs. Cremens, why don't you pull one of the microphones closer to you if you're both going to speak.
Testing, 1, 2.
If you'd just please introduce yourself for the record.
Ludmila Kramens from Alexander Avenue.
Do you want to?
My name is Oleg Kramens, 359 Alexander Avenue, Howell, New Jersey, for more than 50 years. The same place.
Mr. Mayor, we hope that you have good news for us about Lucky's junkyard. It's already 10 years old. How many times you took him to court? 6, 7, 8? Okay. The judge said the first time 10 years ago, the judge gave him 90 days. After that, if he doesn't clean, he had to pay $200 a day fine. A day. So how much money do you have? For 10 years, $200 a day.
We got our COA money.
I think in fairness to Mr. Bongiovanni, he's not handling the case because it's been going on for such a long time. Mr. Gannon has been.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Please, right ahead, sir.
There's a pending enforcement motion. This is what Mr. Gannon has imparted to me. And because of that pending action, in other words, he's going back to court, going back to the municipal court judge for further enforcement. That's the way it was described to me when we discussed it several weeks ago. So since he's not here and we did not anticipate anything tonight, any questions tonight, I can't really help and let you know exactly what he's doing. By the way, Mrs. Crummins is my business partner's aunt, I don't think that's a conflict either. That's not why that's not why Mr. Gannon is handling this case right now.
If I can make one quick comment, Mr. Bongiovanni, since you're new here with this case. You may recall, Mr. Janicki wouldn't recall, but Bill Nunziato and Helene may recall, and Penny definitely recalls, the expedient, AC that they reacted to One Stop. If anybody remembers that, that was a matter of, I think, in 2 years, the man was in jail, the business was closed down, on and on. I mean, 2 years. Now, Mr. Lackey, I've been working on this since the day I came into office, and I am probably more in the rear than I am ahead, and I don't understand, what is the time element in such a case like this? I mean, can this go on until I die? Or when do we hit the wall? That's, I think, what Mrs. Crummins would like to know from me.
That's hard to say without knowing the full case history. I really remember this really more when it was started.
Back in 1980s?
Yeah, when the issue started really coming to our attention some 10 years ago, partly because of Mrs. Crummins' efforts. But since that time, I haven't really followed it. And so without knowing the particulars of the case, I wouldn't really be able to tell you when there's an end in sight. And if Mr. Gannon wasn't able to do that, you know, in the several years he was here, I don't know how I can do that tonight.
No, I don't expect that from you. I would
to give you an end date. When
Could we just, I think, in fairness, this is one of the issues that Mr. Gannon continued to work on, because it didn't make sense
Absolutely.
to hand over years' worth of files. But I think it's probably appropriate, maybe we ask him to give us a written status report on where the whole thing is. We owe the Crummonses an explanation and the other neighbors. It would probably be beneficial to Mrs. Dalton and Mr. Howell in particular. They probably heard about this legendary issue that continues just to move on in the annals of court history. It's unbelievable. Did you have a comment, Mrs. Dalton?
I would just ask if it's possible, since I am rather unfamiliar with the matter, that Mr. Gannon's summary.
he might even be able to pull something out of the file that exists already, so it wouldn't necessarily cost that much.
He's actually done that. He's given us written status reports on it.
Repeatedly.
Mr. Jackson of Code Enforcement probably has the whole place committed to visual memory. I mean, it's just a situation where, you know, I'm sure the lackeys aren't going to be happy with it, but they pick up the junk and they move it from one spot to the next spot, so they come back and they say, look, I cleaned up this spot, and then the junk is over here now. So they get written up because they moved the junk here. So then they come back the next time and the junk's been moved over here. So they write them up because the junk was moved over here. I mean, it's almost an insult. And the judges have, I don't know what the answer is. I sell group health insurance. I'm not a lawyer.
But you know what? The judge told him to clean. That's up to the township.
Mrs. Dalton.
If I can just, because I am unfamiliar with it, but I know that Chapter 185 of our ordinances govern junkyards. Is this a licensed junkyard or not?
Of course not.
No.
It's not a licensed junkyard.
No.
There's been pretty heavy rulings that have suggested that it's not a junkyard. We believe it looks like a junkyard because of the way that it has been maintained. But the issue isn't even that he's operating an illegal junkyard. The issue is he's a neighbor, and in deference to the people that live around him, and the Crummonses aren't the only ones, the property is not appropriately maintained for people that live in a residential area, and it's rather unsightly and it's not well maintained. And for the people that live around the property, I don't want to put words in your mouths, it's unsightly and it's unpleasant.
Well, I think the allegations are beyond that they're selling, you know,
Yes.
junk from there. And so I believe that's the allegations anyway.
You were
So
correct.
I think that's one of the reasons why it's before the municipal court judge, not just that it's unsightly.
Go ahead, Mr. Walker.
Or Superior Court judge.
Yes.
Right, that's the Superior Court level at this point.
I will tell you that Councilwoman Schomaker many times has brought up
Yeah. If it's at the,
with Mr. Gannon, many times.
Once a month.
I've seen you a couple times here.
if it's at the Superior,
Constantly.
if it's at the Superior Court level now, it may take a little bit longer to get a decision, but the difference between municipal court and Superior Court, you might get more finality at that level.
Thank God.
So.
Thanks.
So we'll get a report, Mr. Chiniatsky?
Right, but Mayor, I just want to be clear with respect to the township's role here. You know, at this point, it doesn't rest with the mayor and the council. It rests with the Superior Court judge. And the process to get before the judge is we start at municipal court and work our way through. So please believe me when I tell you that this is, at code enforcement, this is among the top things that they're monitoring, and when it comes time to take action, they have to make sure with the attorney that they don't do anything that's going to jeopardize the case at the Superior Court. Now, you should also know that this happens more often than you'd like to believe, where the other party seems to be able to fund attorneys, as opposed to, some other cases that seem to get resolved a little more quicker. There's different circumstances, but what you ought to know is that a great deal of staff effort and financial effort in terms of paying our attorneys to go to court to deal with these things continues. It's ongoing, and we haven't stopped. And I just know how frustrating it is. And, as a manager, you don't want that showing up in your town. You want to address it quickly. And we're all very frustrated with it.
10 years, that's a long time.
I know.
May I ask a question, please?
Go right ahead, Mr. Cruz.
Maybe a dumb question. If you take a person to court, what happens? Why are you taking him to court?
We're taking him to court because our obligation is to help and protect and defend the residents and the health and welfare of the community. And code enforcement does agree that there are very serious issues, violations. And I think to Mr. Chernetsky's point, it's going through that court process, and it's with a Superior Court judge that now has to make that determination. We're as frustrated as you are that it takes this long. I mean, it's unacceptable.
If I can answer his question, Mayor, the way it starts, let's say we had a law against parking your car, 5 cars on your lawn. Let's just say that as an example. We would issue you first a notice telling you to stop, and how many days you have and how much the fine is. If you don't comply with that, we then issue you a summons, and now it's in a municipal court. And the judge would order you to do one thing or another. And that's where it gets tricky, because now it sort of supersedes local ordinances, and now the rules are what the judge has established. And if one party or the other doesn't like what's happening at the municipal court, you then take it to the county court, the Superior Court. And there, the waiting list is like my ancestors experienced in Eastern Europe. You just wait. You just hurry up and wait.
Well, it's not that bad here.
Well, sometimes the Superior Court gets a little frustrating.
I think
If
Mr.
he's in violation, the first, we went to who was the manager that day?
Edwards?
Mr. Edwards. He wrote a memo. He's in violation, code violation, zoning violation. They took him to court. Court gave, I don't know what it is, as my wife said, so many weeks and supposed to get fined. What? You have no power at all?
This is now in the hands, in the checks and balances of government. We are the legislative branch.
Yes.
This is now in the branch that is called the judiciary. And the judiciary now has an obligation to hand down the final decision about what ultimately will happen. And that, in fact, to what Mr. Bongiovanni and Mr. Chernetsky have elaborated, is what the judge is looking at. The judiciary's obligation is to make determinations about enforcement of the law and interpretations of the law. We're waiting now for the judiciary to pass down their determination. But that's the honest answer, folks. I wish we could tell you more.
Is the case in court now?
It is.
It is?
It's in Superior Court.
Yes, and Mayor, you're exactly right. We're at the point where we're asking the judge for the power to enforce our rights.
Yeah.
But he did before, a few years ago.
Really. There
So
were
how many times he
there were
has
so many times, you probably took him 50 times to court. Court always rules for you, and nothing was getting from Township. He didn't get no summonses, he didn't pay no violation, whatever it is, nothing was done. And then you could take him to court again. Judge says, this is it, let him do this. Township, nothing.
You should.
I received a summons, I had a small trailer on my property
Without license plate.
without a license plate. And I went, took it right off. He's got about 16 wheelers over there right now, with the junk all over the place.
Mr. Crimmins, in sum, here's the difference. you were willing to comply with the law,
Yes.
and you remedied the situation. We have someone who disagrees with our determinations that he's in violation. So he's challenging the decision. In your example, you didn't have the license on your trailer, you knew it wasn't the right thing, you fixed it.
No, sure.
We have someone that is challenging it, and whether we like it or not, they have rights, and they're using the court system to their advantage. I wish there was more that we could tell you. In all candor, we'll get the update from Mr. Gannon. We'll share a printed copy of it with you, and I don't know if there's anything else we can add to it. Mrs. Sherman, you have a final comment?
I would just like, if you would just go over to Mr. Chernicki and give him your address. If we could just forward whatever we get from Mr. Gannon to Mr. and Mrs. Crummins, so that, give them some update. I think that would give them some level of comfort, but not anywhere near what they want.
Mr. Gannon, he told us in 2005, in August, he's going back to court. What happened from 2005? Nothing.
Mr. Chernetsky, you'll get the update from Mr. Gannon, you'll get the Crummins' address, and we'll certainly get you any update we have.
You say if he doesn't comply, do the same thing as you did to One Stop.
In jail.
I think that we're hoping that the judge comes to that same determination.
He didn't take that long with One Stop.
No, he didn't.
Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, folks.
That's fine.
We share in your frustration. Please, I can assure you of that. Mr. Magid, welcome, sir. Come on up. I guess so. It's been here since I've been around. He literally, in a phone, he's up this stuff. He moves it to him. They go out.
I'm Abe Magid, 89 Mariners Cove. And for the moment, only for the moment, I have quite a smile on my face because I'm surprised that Mr. Walsh, when he heard his lights were out and Mr. Schumacher's lights were on, he didn't take some kind of umbrage in saying he's as qualified devoutly as she is, but maybe it doesn't quite work that way. Who can question it?
I didn't want to take offense that way, and
No. Who knows? Actually, I'm a long way from being a true believer and my lights were on, so who can tell? Might be out tomorrow.
How can we help you, Mr. Magid?
Well, also, I certainly concur it would be great politically if you could give everybody a $1,000 rebate on their property. The only thing is, Trenton can do that and go into dire debt and issue more indebtedness. So if you run for governor...
Oh, God forbid.
Well, you might get. By the way, it's interesting because, just as a side, levity for the moment, then we get serious. When I heard about this 20%, I said, voila, this is great.
What do you talk, Mr. Magid, what do you...
20% on the property tax rebate. The only thing is, somebody at AARP and all the other senior citizens must have been very asleep. Because I called Senator Singh, I said, hi, great. Not so great. As a senior, I automatically get a rebate of $1,200 every year. So, what it means, the 20%, maybe will provide me a few more shekels over the $1,200. But basically, it's got to be one or the other, which is greater. Now, for Trenton to go into such incredible debt, because I did a little slipstick, log duplex, the amount of money that's going to flow out from Trenton to guys like a Manalapan, Marlboro, the big machas are still going to the city, making six figures or whatever. They're going to get at least $3,000, $4,000, or whatever is the limit. So there'll be a nice thing. But that aside. Oh, and one more thing. I'm a conservative, compassionate conservative, as Bush likes to say. And I've heard here tonight so much that we don't have legal power. I mean, the heart's with it, legal power, we can. But I'm going to get on to some things that seems to me we can. But even before that, something very serious. I want to tell you in advance. At the Township Council meeting on February the 16th of 2007, that's 2 weeks ago, a man who is a resident of Howell Township came up in front of you, Mr. Mayor, and the Town Council, and proceeded to give my name He gave my name. And then he proceeded to state that I was abusive, that my questions were full of contempt, that I was venomous to you, Mr. Mayor, and that, as he put it, I went over the edge, and that he was so furious with me that he said I wanted to throw the bum out. This is absolute slander against my character. But we'll pass over that. What is really important, Mr. Mayor, is that you allowed him to make these remarks against me. At no time did you say to him that this is no place at a town council meeting for one person to so bad-mouth another person who is spoken at the council meeting. Can you imagine what would happen at these council meetings if a member of the audience was allowed to come up and make such character and slanderous remarks about someone who had spoken in front of this town council? I urge you in the strongest terms to condemn remarks made to this council about anyone else who has spoken to the town council with such slanderous and vituperative utterances. Can you imagine my feelings and concern when I heard what this individual had said? He said, I want to throw the bum out. This must never be allowed to take place again, where a resident can so vilify another resident at this town council meeting, and especially with the threat of, I wanted to throw the bum out. Now, before I go on with what I came here tonight to talk about, I want your comments, Mr. Mayor, about someone coming up to so slander another resident of this township so that it will never be done again in these chambers.
Mr. Maggot, let me say this. You're right, and I apologize.
I don't want your apology. I don't
Mr.
know.
Maggot,
You didn't do anything wrong.
Mr. Maggot, but let me finish.
Okay.
Part of the issue, Mr. Maggot, in fairness, is that you don't let people get their thought out, and you don't want to hear what people have to say, and quite frankly, I think at times you frustrate people. You frustrate the hell out of me sometimes, and I'm being perfectly candid with you. Now, in terms of chairing the meeting, at the time Mr. Costigan came up, the hour was late, his comments were fairly brief. I do have a recollection. I should have at the time said, Mr. Costigan, comments are out of line. We shouldn't be speaking ill of another resident. I appreciate your frustration with how someone else, in your judgment, conducted themselves, but it shouldn't be tolerated in this chair. I'm not going to tolerate it. So I was wrong.
I want to comment on... Oh, I
Maggot.
thought you were done. I'm sorry. I'll comment on what you said.
I should have recognized at the time that his statement was out of line. But frankly, this is not an issue of Mr. Costigan. If you have an issue with him, that's a personal one. I'm not going to get in the middle of it. As chair, I have an obligation to make certain that things like that don't happen. I do my best to make every effort to make it happen. When Mr. Costigan made his remarks, I should have stopped him. I didn't. The buck stops with me. I run the meetings. I'm accountable. It's my fault. And I apologize.
All right.
But I'm going to tell you.
I thought you were done.
But at the same time, there are times, in fairness, that you do take a tone at times, Mr. Maggot, that I don't think this council or the previous council deserved. And at times, your remarks could be interpreted, quite frankly, as if the council doesn't care or isn't interested in helping you. And I got to tell you, I think it frustrates, and I can't speak for the council, but my sense is we're all probably a little frustrated that you don't think we want to help you, because we're all here because we want to help. So I think you do need to take a step back for a minute and at times maybe just think about the way the message is delivered, because we do want to help. It's our job to help. We'd like to get Mrs. Dixell her fence, and we'd love to pave the roads in the villages, and there's a whole bunch of things we'd love to do, but we can't do all of them. And so don't think that because we can't take immediate action and mobilize the forces and send out the ground troops that we're not interested in not helping you. because it does get a little old at times when you come up and you beat the hell out of us, and we really do want to help you. So just keep that in the back of your mind. I do apologize that I did not stop Mr. Costigan for his remarks. That was my fault. I think we've covered it.
No.
I hope you'll accept my apology.
Oh, no.
I think in the interest of time, why don't you tell us what you'd like to talk about
No,
tonight?
I
how
want
we
to
can
comment
help
on
you.
what you just said.
Go ahead.
You totally missed the gravity of the point. It's inconsequential what anybody in the audience may think about how I proceed here. And it's not that he just stepped out of line. It is a classic thing that must never be done. Never, never, never. Where one resident can so badmouth another resident for any thoughts they may have. And so when you said to me, almost as a palliative for his action, what I say, that's between myself and this council. I think I was excellent. You may not think so. But the clarion point here is that no resident, and that certainly includes me, may ever come to this mic and ever badmouth and such incredible language, like I saw it about mouth, but even bad language. And I'm asking you to be extremely forceful that that can never happen again. And it is not between Mr. Costigan and I didn't give his name, you did. It is strictly your absolutely strenuous duty to see that this platform here doesn't turn into some kind of a horror thing where one resident can come up and badmouth another resident by how they perceived he proceeded.
We agree.
All right, now I will go on.
Mr. Walsh wants to be recognized.
Mr. Mayor, I think every person in this room, and that's just me making an assumption, but me personally, just heard the mayor say to you that he should have stopped it, it was inappropriate, and he missed it at that moment. And he took responsibility for it. I mean, if you didn't hear that, Mr. Maggot, then that is what's getting so frustrating sometimes in life from you, okay? Because I heard him say that perfectly clear. And we don't always see eye to eye, okay? I heard it perfectly clear. I was wrong. It was inappropriate. I should have stopped it. Perfectly clear. Just so you know. I don't think I misinterpreted him. I think anybody else in this room did.
I heard him clearly as you did. Had he just said what you just said, that would have done it. He didn't do that. He used then how I proceed with the town council as maybe it brought this about. He didn't do that. He then talked about me. He didn't say in one or two sentences what you just said. That would have been right. And as far as having thoughts about me with the town council, vis-a-vis the council and me, that's our business. Never can a resident go up ever and knock anybody else. So now I'll continue.
Thank you.
Because otherwise you have anarchy. All right, now.
So how can we help, Mr. Maggot?
All right, I'm continuing on. Now, I spoke with Mr. Dombrowski this morning, from the DP, Andrew Dombrowski. And he did tell me that he received a call from, well, he said Susan. It's Susan Walter of the engineering department last Friday, and she asked for some additional help and guidance. Well, why not just me? It's very short. I spoke with Mr. Dombrowski of the DP today. He told me that Susan Walter for Howell had spoken to him last Friday, and that she had asked him, that is Andrew Dombrowski, for some guidance for an application for a permit that she was working on. This permit to allow the removal of the fallen trees from the Manasquan River alongside Mariners Cove. That's all I was asking for, Mariners Cove. Now, I understand that the township engineer, Mr. Nunziato, is going to give a report, which I heard, I wrote this before I came here, on this matter here tonight, and I would like to hear this report, which I did. Now, at the last meeting, February the 6th, when I pointed out to you, Mr. Mayor, the direness of this situation, of the flooding of Mariners Cove, where even after a few days of rain, I was told by you at that meeting that this meant doing this work on private property. As you kept saying, this could have consequences in the future if other people wanted you to do something. No private property is involved to remove the fallen trees from the Manasquan River. Now, if you have to cross somebody's lot in Mariners Cove, they'll be delighted to have you because of our dire situation. But this is not work on private property. This is work on the Manasquan River. Now, also you said that there were 60 or 70 other conditions in Howell that are life-threatening. I'm quoting your words. That are life-threatening, that you have to consider before taking action on the removal of the fallen trees from the Manasquan River that will cause flooding if there are a few days of heavy rainfall. Now, I would really like to know, what are those 60 or 70 conditions that are so life-threatening? I would like to know. Also, you went on to say that the council has to decide whether it is appropriate for them, these are your words, to remove these fallen trees, where you mentioned something about policy and procedures. You certainly left it up in the air, at least at that meeting, as to whether you absolutely intended to remove these fallen trees, and certainly as to when you would do it if you decided to do it. Now, yesterday, Monday, the temperature during the day was only in the middle 20s. And today, Tuesday, one day later, it's in the middle 40s. Nature is not predictable. But surely, as we move away from the winter and into March and the spring, the chances of many days of heavy rain becomes very likely. At the previous meeting of December the 6th, you had no answer to my question as to whether you have ever gone out to find out what equipment it will take to remove these fallen trees from the Manasquan River and who can be hired to do this. Now, I heard tonight something that to me is quite amazing. I heard Mr. Nunziato say that he's applying for this permit not just in my area where we get the flooding, but all the way to West Farms Road. It would involve maybe 100 people to be notified if he did that, and what things there might be involved for that. Where does it say that you have to apply for the whole length? Or if you do, where does it say you must immediately proceed to do the whole length? In other words, what I'm saying is, I'm interested because they've said years ago they shouldn't have built there, but they built there. And when you put the trees falling in, it really does the job on this. So instead of waiting to be concerned with miles of the Manasquan River, even if we got the permit, or we could do it in parts, apply for my section and later apply for another. That's not quite as dire as ours. If we're applying and we're granted the whole length, it stands to reason we're not going to do the whole length to start with. It's enough work to do this. So I said this before I found out. I said, file immediately with the DEP for the permit to do this. All right. Certainly, you have had far more than enough time to request this permit from the DEP during the last few months. Now, again, when I spoke with Mr. Jambowski, he told me also that internally here, there were procedures that had to be done, because he hasn't received it yet. All right, so one, to file for that permit, even if it's that small section, then later go for the other. And two, very important, find out what is involved to get these fallen trees out of the Manasquan River. I'm talking in my area there, Mariners Cove. It only affects terribly, I'd say, about 8 or 10 houses, the way the water comes up. The rest is not good, but 8 or 10 houses vitally affected. So find out what's involved to get these fallen trees out of the Manasquan River in our area, and do it with all haste before those heavy rains will be coming in the spring with the warmer weather upon us.
Okay. Mr. Chernetsky, in your report, apparently Mr. Baggett said you're going to make some comment on this tonight. Is that right?
I made my comment, Mayor, during my...
So that was it?
Yes.
Okay, so there wasn't
told me.
anything further. I just wanted to be
He told
clear.
me, yes, the
Okay.
whole business, down to West Farms Road.
Okay.
And I said, hey,
Is he
let's
done?
do it for where we are first,
Okay.
and then go on to the
So
other.
there's nothing else that we can respond to, Mr. Chernetsky? I think your report sort of covers where we are at this point. Is that accurate?
Mayor, Mr. Nunziato indicated that the purpose of Mr. Nunziato's report was to let you know that a number of residents were going to be getting notices, that you should be aware of that as elected officials. He is proceeding with his, the regulatory end, and, you know, we have an understanding what we need to do at the staff end.
Okay.
Some things may require budget considerations on the council's part as we move into it.
Okay.
All right,
But that's all I'm ready to
Well,
report.
I want to comment on that, and what Mr. Nunziato said.
I'm going to ask you, Mr. Maggie, just to wrap it up in another minute. We
Yeah,
got
I have very
1
little
minute.
left, very little left.
1 minute.
Well, hopefully. Let's
on.
give it a try.
No, Mr.
Well,
Maggie.
let's not discuss it, let me talk, okay? Look, the whole thing here is not for us to wait because of so many procedures may be involved. If
Mr.
you're
Maggie, I'm
gonna
going to stop you.
Put a
Hold-
permit
Mr.
for
Maggie,
miles.
Mr. Maggie, I'm going to stop you. We heard...
All right, then I'll tell you something else.
You're not. We're done. We
Wait.
heard from Mr. Nunziato.
Wait. You heard from Nunziato.
Mr.
You haven't
Maggie.
heard from me yet a final thing.
Mr.
I'm
Maggie.
going to wrap it up. The end of this
Mr.
page.
Maggie, we're done.
Why do you
here's
say
the
that?
takeaway. Here's
Why-
the takeaway. We're going through the regulatory process. We're pursuing everything that we need to do.
For
Mr.
100 people instead of 8 people? Is that
Mr.
what
Maggie,
you're
if
saying?
I hate to do this.
All right.
With
You-
all
I
due
don't mean to
respect.
cut you off, but don't cut me off.
I'm in the middle of speaking.
Yes, and
Mayor.
I'll stop, and then I want to comment.
And so we're done.
No,
Thanks.
I'm not.
Mr.
It's-
Maggie, you're finished.
100
Thank
people
you.
instead of 8
Mr.
people?
Tillo, you're up. Mr. Maggie, you're out of order. You're finished for the night. We heard the report. There's not, this council disagreed.
I
Are we
have
moving on?
heard the report. 100 people have to be notified
They
instead of
do.
8.
We have an obligation to comply with the law, which we're going to do. I think we've given you every explanation. Mr. Maggie, have a safe night. Mr.
You too.
Tintillo?
I hope you like it.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Tintillo. Welcome.
Good evening, council. Vinnie Tantillo, Casino Drive. Just for the record, I live on a river. I've been here 42 years. And before the township does anything, I'll tell you what, you have to get the Army Corps of Engineers. That's who I had to call to get trees out of the river, or they'd sue you. And I hate to see the township sued by the Army Corps of Engineers. And Mr. Chernetsky, just a word to the wise before anybody goes in there. I even forgot what I was going to talk about. God
Says you want
bless
to
you,
talk
just can
about
take this.
Casino Drive. What's
Yeah,
your
I told
comment?
Vinnie Tantillo, Casino Drive.
Oh, that was your, I'm sorry. It says subject matter to be discussed.
Oh.
Casino Drive.
Yeah,
I thought
see,
we had some issue
it
on casino.
confused me before I even signed it.
Okay.
I'd like to say one thing first before I start. Glad to see you're getting along. And about this tragedy we had, sure would have been a good time for this girl to have the Youth and Family Services today, which we don't have.
Actually, we do. Hold on a minute.
We do?
You should know this. We do have Youth and Family Services. It's at the same building. It operates the same services. They don't turn anyone away. They, if you don't have insurance, they provide indigent care. It simply now is run by a private company that doesn't turn anyone away.
They can counsel
They
her.
can counsel them. Those services remain completely available in our building, on our dime, with the same staff. It's actually the same people. They
Great,
now work for
great.
the private company. There are some staff changes, but many of the same employees that actually work there.
No, glad to
So
hear
it's
that.
good to note that, and
Thank
if
you.
anyone, even in particular, the young lady Mrs. Showmaker brought up, we still have Youth and Family Services. It's simply now run by a private enterprise off the taxpayers' rolls.
But that girl can't get counseled.
She
by her.
absolutely can.
Okay. The reason I came here tonight, I've lived here a long time. And I see everybody complains about taxes, and that's going to go on forever. But I see all our schools open. And on the schools, if you go to them, any of them, you'll see plaques. Normally 2 plaques with the Board of Education. You got, excuse me, one plaque will be the funding group, and the other plaque will be the acceptance group or the acceptance person or whoever they're dedicating it to or whatever. In the case of buildings and grounds building, we waited till Toby Road died before we dedicated the building to him. Everybody has family. Everybody wants their children to be proud of them. As Joey does, we got a 9/11 thing out there with Joey's name on it. That's nice for his kids to see. We have one person in this town who is a very, very good friend of mine, who is a friend of yours, Joe, Mr. Morrell, who's been left out of an awful lot of things in this town. And back in 1970, Harvey had a vision of making a police department in this town. And I was very adamant about it with him and helped him all I could, as well as Dan Masser and Dan Myers and a whole bunch of people. Harvey on his own put numerous hours going to Trenton, back and forth, to get a charter, just to mention a few things. We had the state police back then. A lot of you didn't live in the town at that time. But many people in this town respect this man immensely. He was honored to take the seat that Mr. DeBella has as mayor also. He's a great man. He's done a lot for the township. As every mayor, somebody's going to say something wrong, you know, oh, he didn't do this, he didn't do that. That comes with the territory. But he was honored to have that seat, as Mr. DeBella did, and every other mayor that we've had. And what I get real mad about is I'm involved with the police department on certain things, and every time I go there, I see a plaque that says Chief Gary Picanti. I have nothing against Mr. Picanti. He was a pretty nice fellow. But he was the second chief of Howell Township. The first chief was Harvey Morrell, who started the police department, who drew the plans for that building, who was sworn in August 27th, I think it was August 27th, 1971. He was sworn in the afternoon at 4 o'clock. I'll never forget it. He's a great person. Everybody I know loves this guy. And I believe the mayor does also, as many people in this room do. I remember Harvey, we had another good friend of mine who passed away about a month and a half ago, George Garrow. It hurts me even to talk about him. Mr. Swatage, Eddie Pohl, who's still alive and he's still working. The other 2 gentlemen died. What I'd like, if the township can do it, we do a whole bunch of other things that mean nothing in my book compared to this. I would like to see a dedication made with that police station, with a plaque, with Harvey Morrell's name on it, dedicating that building to him, and have a whole service, a memorial, ribbon cutting, whatever you do. I don't know how it's done, but I've been to many of them. And I think everybody in this town that watches this on television knows exactly what I'm saying when I say Mr. Morrell was left out of a lot of things in this town. He's done wonders for a lot of people, things that people don't even know about. And I'm not talking politics, has nothing to do with it. In my book, he's been one of the best friends I've ever had in my life. And I know him a lot of years. I watched his children grow as he watched mine grow. And I would like to know if there's any way we could dedicate something to Harvey and get something put on that building the way it should be, the way it should have been when the building was made. And I think everybody in this room who knows him would agree with me that he is one hell of a person. And I'd really like to see this happen while Harvey's alive, while his kids can see this and be proud of him. And that's all I can say.
Well said,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Tantillo. I happen to agree with you 100%. I think the building should be the Harvey Morrell Municipal Court and Police Department. I could go on as long as you did about what a fantastic human being Harvey Morrell is. He's one of the finest friends I have. So I couldn't agree more with everything you said. I hope the council will consider it, and that we should dedicate the building and put a plaque on it and do everything you said. He deserves that and 100-fold for what he did for this community. Couldn't agree more.